Welcome back to AM Northwest. It's a moving memoir about her life in California during the wildfires of 2020. Here to share the last fire season, we welcome author Manjula Martin. Good to have you with us.
It's great to be here.
Tell me about the title, though, the last fire season. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a bit of a reference to what's happening with climate change when the wildfires are worsening in the American West. And they say that there's no longer a season of fire. Now it's a fire year.
Right. It's going on all the time.
Yeah. But it's also a little bit the idea that, you know, if we think of fire as a season, which we very much have in Northern California and the West, you know, that means at some point it will end. But the truth is that fire sort of is an essential part of these environments and part of our ecology and our world, and it lives here just like we do.
You moved to Northern California from San Francisco, right? So tell me about why the move and then what you experienced when you were there, when you moved.
Well, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, a pretty similar environment to what I live in now, like redwood forests as well as coastal. It's pretty gorgeous. And I always lived in big cities. I'm an artsy, you know, writer. And then in 2017, I sort of felt myself drawn to go back to that kind of natural environment and ended up in Sonoma County in the redwoods.
Did you feel when you moved there that you were kind of exempt from climate change or the adverse effects?
I think.
Did you feel like, oh, I'm good, we won't get anything too harsh, right?
I mean, you know, I knew there had been wildfires, and I knew that climate change was happening, as we all do. But I think because I have a life of relative privilege, I'm American, and I have other types of privilege, I didn't really understand that climate change was actually happening now. I thought of it as something that will happen. And in distant places almost, because we see the documentaries on climate change, and we think it is happening more in like the North Pole, that kind of thing. And I mean in what they call the global South, you know, and climate change really has been hitting, you know, other places first because we live in the U.S. We've been relatively sheltered by it due to global geopolitics as much as anything else.
When you write about the fires that started in 2020, so much was going on there. We had the pandemic, quarantine, and all of that craziness, and the impact, and then to have all of this happen at that time, that was a lot to go through. This is a personal memoir, not just about fires and climate change.
It weaves in the story of the wildfires of that year, as well as relevant sort of history and ecology and natural history. And it also weaves in a personal health crisis that I had at the same time. When I moved to the woods, I experienced a health crisis that left me with chronic pain. And so part of my experience of recovering from that was really sort of in my garden, puttering around, growing flowers. And that was a way that I really reconnected with the natural world, only to find that, you know, the environment that I was sort of falling in love with was also in crisis.
So tell me about what you learned putting the book together. Like what surprised you?
You know, what surprised me about the writing process was that it's like writing a memoir. You think like, oh, I'm just going to write down what happened, you know, but it's actually just as complicated as writing a novel or another kind of nonfiction book.
But when it comes to fires, you learn like there's a lot of money in the whole fire prevention, fire fighting system, right?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, fire suppression is something that goes back to colonization on the West Coast, and the suppression of indigenous fire. Indigenous people have always used fire as part of land management. So the land is actually reliant on fire to sort of stay healthy. What we've been doing is putting out all fires, you know, and as a result, the land is not healthy. And so a lot of what I look at in the book is really looking at bringing back good fire. And following.
Because you talk about that good fire versus bad fire.
Exactly.
And how we need fire.
I mean, we do need fire. And fire, these are fire-adapted landscapes, you know, that I'm talking about in the book. And they've been without it.
And we need to, I think, learn a little bit more about fire ecology in general, don't
Absolutely,
you think?
Fire ecology is really interesting. There's, in the book, there's a few scenes where I visit burned areas, like big, you know, redwood state parks that have burned, and look at sort of the way that things rebound after fire and how the land really sort of balances itself out after fire. and also ways that it's harmful.
Is there hope? Because it feels like there isn't hope when it comes to climate change.
That's a great question, and I talk about it a lot in the book. I talk a little bit about like what I call hashtag hope, which is this sort of what I think of as like an unwarranted hope. You know, the idea that it's all going to be okay and we're going to fix it, and everything's going to go back to normal. But what I think is really true is that in the process of connecting with each other and forming community and learning more about fire, connecting with nature, learning how to take care of the landscape, that's where the hope is, in these like relationships, in creating community and actually learning how to make change.
We want to tell everyone, now you have a book event at Powell's, and that's tonight at 7 o'clock, Powell's City of Books on 10th and West Burnside. We're going to put all the information on our website at k2.com, and the book again is titled The Last Fire Season. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Great to be here.
All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.